Warning, do not watch this alone. Some airports were shut down, some planes were retired, but not everything was cleared. What you are about to hear involves sealed incidents, abandoned runways, and aircraft that should never have flown again. Once aviation is interrupted by death, something stays behind. Before Suvarnabhumi Airport was ever a blueprint, the land it now occupies was a place people avoided for generations. It was a place you didn't go after dark, a place where stories were whispered, not spoken. Long before the first inch of tarmac was laid, this entire area was a vast, desolate swampland, and it wasn't empty. It was used for burials, a final resting place for countless souls. During times of war and terrible famine, it became the site of massed graves. It was also where executions were carried out, a place stained with tragedy and sorrow. The local beliefs, passed down through the years, were firm. The dead here did not move on cleanly. They were not at peace. The spirits were said to sink into the damp soil, trapped in a grim limbo between water and earth. So when the announcement came that a massive international airport would be built right on top of this haunted ground, many locals felt a deep sense of dread. It felt like a violation. As construction began, the modern world of steel and concrete collided with the ancient world of spirits. The first strange reports came from the construction crews. Workers operating heavy machinery, the deafening roar of engines surrounding them, started hearing things, voices, not echoes bouncing off half-finished structures. Not the whispers of the wind or tricks of an overworked imagination. These were clear voices, calling out names from beneath the very ground they were digging into. A chilling, impossible sound that had no logical source. The strange occurrences escalated. The night shift workers, toiling under harsh floodlights in the middle of the empty swamp, were the most affected. One by one, they began collapsing, fainting without any medical explanation. They weren't injured, they weren't sick, they would just suddenly drop. In certain areas of the construction site, equipment would fail repeatedly, without any discernible cause. Engines would die, electronics would short out, only to work perfectly once moved to a different location. The same zones, over and over, seemed to reject the machinery. One bulldozer operator, a seasoned veteran, quit on the spot. He later told his friends that as he drove his machine, the ground beneath the heavy treads felt wrong. It felt soft, he said, not like mud or soil, but like stepping on flesh. His story spread like wildfire through the camps. Then came the most terrifying incident. A laborer, in the middle of his shift, suddenly stopped working. His eyes went blank, and he entered a trance-like state. He began speaking, but the voice that came out of his mouth was not his own. It was deep, authoritative, and ancient. It identified itself as a guardian of the land, a protector of the dead, demanding the construction stop. Of course, officials publicly dismissed everything. It was all chalked up to exhaustion, heat stroke, or mass hysteria, fueled by local superstitions. But behind the scenes, the sheer volume of incidents was becoming impossible to ignore. The workers were terrified, and many refused to continue. The locals, hearing the stories, became more insistent. Their pleas grew louder. This wasn't an engineering problem, it was a spiritual one. They demanded that monks be brought in to cleanse the land before more tragedy struck. The pressure mounted until the project developers could no longer ignore it. They finally conceded and organized a massive ceremony. 99 respected monks were brought to the site to perform a series of complex and ancient cleansing rituals. For days, they chanted prayers, made offerings, and tried to appease the restless spirits. Offerings were even buried beneath the very spots where the runways would be paved. A desperate attempt to create a spiritual foundation of peace. And then, the airport opened. Officially, the problem was solved. The land was declared spiritually cleared, safe for the millions of passengers who would soon pass through. But those who worked there knew the truth. The activity hadn't stopped. It had just moved indoors. After midnight, when the terminals grew quiet, the real strangeness began. Staff in the control rooms noticed airport intercoms crackling to life on their own, broadcasting static or faint whispers, even when they were disconnected from power. The vast empty terminals, designed to feel open and welcoming, felt occupied. A heavy presence lingered in the air. Security guards on their lonely patrols reported seeing figures standing at the very edge of the light, always just out of the frame of the security cameras. They'd turn to look, and there would be nothing there, just a lingering feeling of being watched. The cleansing had failed. The airport was open, but it was not alone. To this day, certain corridors and sections of Suvarnabhumi Airport remained closed off to the public, and even to most staff. The official reasons are always mundane: maintenance, renovations, system upgrades. But the maintenance logs tell a different story. They show repeated, inexplicable failures of lighting, electronics, and structural systems, all concentrated in the same closed-off areas. There's a rumor about a specific wing in one of the terminals. It's said that the security footage from that area was so disturbing that it was permanently archived, sealed away, and never released to anyone. Employees who have to work near these abandoned sections all say the same thing. The air feels different there. It's heavy, thick, as if you're breathing in something more than just air. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to take a full breath. It's a physical pressure, an unseen weight that presses down on you. They call it the dead zone. The airport authorities continue to deny that anything is wrong, but the whispers persist among the staff. They know that parts of their gleaming modern workplace don't truly belong to the living. The foundation was built on graves, and some of the original occupants never left. Suvarnabhumi Airport was declared fully operational, a jewel of modern aviation. But the activity never stopped. The voices, the shadows, the heavy feeling in the air, they all became a part of the airport's secret identity. And this disturbing pattern, where the world of the living and the world of the dead collide, isn't unique to this one location. It appears elsewhere, in other airports, on other tarmacs. But it's most potent, most terrifying, where planes were involved in tragedy. Especially on planes that never completed their final journey. What you've just heard is only the beginning. The ground is one thing, but when the spirits attach themselves to the machines, that's when things get far more dangerous. In our next part, we will board an aircraft that has a permanent, unseen passenger list. We'll investigate Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a flight that crashed, but whose crew reportedly never left their posts. They were seen on other planes, in cockpits and cabins, still trying to ensure the safety of their passengers, long after they were gone. Have you ever sat on a plane, waiting for takeoff, and felt a strange chill? A feeling that you're not just surrounded by fellow passengers, but by something else entirely. Airports are gateways to the world, bustling hubs of travel and adventure. But they are also places of last goodbyes, sudden departures, and sometimes, tragic final moments. What if some of these moments left an echo, a permanent stain on the very ground where they occurred? What if some spirits never completed their final flight? Today, we're journeying into the world's most haunted airports, where spectral figures walk the runways and phantom aircraft appear on radar. Fasten your seatbelts, because this flight is about to get turbulent. Our first stop is Archerfield Airport in Queensland, Australia. This isn't just any old airfield. It has a history steeped in World War II. In 1943, a military transport plane, a C-47 Dakota, was taking off. It was a routine flight, loaded with American servicemen heading home. But moments after its wheels left the ground, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft lost control, spiraled, and crashed in a fiery explosion. All 23 people on board perished. It was a devastating loss, a tragedy of war that happened far from any battlefield. For years, the story of the crash was just that, a sad memory, a historical footnote. But then, decades later, the stories began. Pilots, hardened professionals, who trust their instruments and their eyes above all else, started seeing something impossible. It always happened near the old runway, the same one used during the war. A figure would appear out of nowhere, a man in a vintage military uniform. He was described as walking slowly, almost aimlessly, along the tarmac. The most chilling detail: he was carrying a parachute, one that was clearly never opened, never deployed. It hung limp, a symbol of a chance never taken. Pilots would see him, slow their taxiing aircraft, and try to get a better look. Who was this person, wandering onto an active airfield? But as they got closer, he would simply vanish, just dissolve into thin air. At first, these were isolated incidents, dismissed as tricks of the light or fatigue, but the sightings became more frequent, more consistent. Flights started getting delayed. Pilots, spooked by the apparition, grew hesitant. Some flat out refused to perform night landings if it meant using the section of the airport near the old runway. The Ghost of Archerfield Airport was no longer a rumor. He was becoming a real operational problem. As you can imagine, airport authorities weren't exactly keen on advertising that their facility was haunted. Officially, they denied everything. No ghost, no uniformed figure, no paranormal activity. It was all pilot error, misidentification, or pure imagination. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. In hushed conversations in break rooms and hangars, pilots compared their experiences. They found unnerving similarities. The sightings almost always clustered around the anniversary of the 1943 crash. The details were identical: the old uniform, the unopened parachute, the sudden disappearance. The legend grew. Some pilots even claimed to feel an unseen presence in the cockpit with them just before takeoff. A cold spot, or the distinct sensation of being watched. Others reported that their radios, crystal clear across the rest of the airport, would erupt in a burst of static precisely when they passed the old runway section. It was as if something was trying to communicate from the other side, or maybe just disrupt the living from crossing its path. The silence from the officials only fueled the belief that they knew more than they were letting on. The Ghost of Archerfield wasn't just a story. For those who flew there, he was a very real and unsettling part of the job. Now let us cross the globe to one of the busiest airports in the world, Heathrow in London. Heathrow is a city unto itself, a place of constant motion. But when the infamous London fog rolls in, visibility drops, and the airport takes on an entirely different, almost eerie atmosphere. It's during these periods of heavy fog that ground crews have reported seeing him, the fog man. He doesn't walk or move, he just appears. A solitary figure, standing motionless near parts of the airport with a history of crashes. His description is the stuff of nightmares. His clothing appears scorched and tattered, as if he's just walked out of a fire. But his face is what truly terrifies witnesses. It's described as blurred, indistinct, as if the memory of his features has been burned away. He's an unfinished phantom, a sketch of a man who met a fiery end. He stands there, a silent, terrifying statue in the mist, and then, as quickly as he appeared, he's gone. What's even more disturbing is the alleged response from management. Workers who dared to officially report a sighting of the fog man were often quietly transferred to different departments or different shifts, away from the areas where he appeared. The message was clear: see it, but don't speak of it. The fog at Heathrow, it seems, hides more than just the runways. Our next tale takes us back to the United States, to another titan of aviation, O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. O'Hare is a logistical marvel, handling thousands of flights a day. The air traffic controllers there are some of the best in the world, trained to handle immense pressure and make split-second decisions. So imagine their confusion and their fear when one day a blip appeared on their radar screens that shouldn't have been there. It was an aircraft, but it had no transponder signal, which is what identifies a plane and its altitude. There was no flight plan filed for it. Air traffic control hailed it on all frequencies, but there was only silence. Controllers scrambled to get a visual confirmation from pilots in the air and crews on the ground. Nothing. No one could see it. It was a ghost plane, a phantom aircraft flying silently through one of the most crowded airspaces on the planet. For a few tense minutes, it tracked across their screens, and then it just vanished. The blip blinked out of existence. The investigation that followed found that the anomaly occurred near the airspace associated with a previous, infamous mass fatality crash. The controllers involved in the incident were profoundly shaken. They refused all interviews, and the official records of the event were reportedly sealed. What did they track that day? A glitch in the system? Or a digital ghost? The echo of a tragic flight replaying its final moments on the screens of the living. These stories from Archerfield, Heathrow, and O'Hare are just a few of the countless tales of airport hauntings from around the world. At each location, authorities have tried to move on. Crash sites were eventually cleared, fenced off, and forgotten by the public. Old runways were decommissioned, torn up, and repaved. New terminals were built over old ground, burying the past under layers of concrete and steel. But these accounts suggest something unsettling. They suggest that you can't just pave over a tragedy. You can't just fence off a memory. When a life is cut short so violently, so suddenly, in a place defined by departures, maybe the journey doesn't always end. These spectral figures, these phantom echoes, seem to be trapped in a loop, forever tethered to their final moments. They are the passengers who never reached their destination, the pilots who never completed their landing. So what happens when the dead don't stay grounded? It seems they wait. They walk the old runways, appear in the fog, and flicker across radar screens. A constant, chilling reminder that some departures are final, but some souls never truly leave the airport. Have you ever wondered what happens to a plane after a crash? I mean, the parts that are still usable? Do they just throw them away? Or do they find their way back into the sky, carrying with them more than just mechanical history? Tonight, we're re-delving into one of aviation's most chilling ghost stories, the hauntings of Eastern Airlines Flight 401. It was December 29, 1972, a brand new Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was on its final approach to Miami International Airport. Inside, 176 souls, the crew was troubleshooting a landing gear indicator light that had failed to illuminate. Distracted, they didn't notice the plane's slow, silent descent toward the ground below. It crashed into the dark abyss of the Florida Everglades. In the chaos and the wreckage, 101 people lost their lives, including the captain, Robert Loft, and the flight engineer, Donald Repo. It was a tragedy born from a simple burnt-out light bulb. In the aftermath, a massive salvage operation began. Parts of the wrecked L-1011 that were deemed salvageable were recovered, cleaned, and certified for reuse. This was standard practice, a way to save money and resources. These components, like galley ovens and storage compartments, were installed on other L-1011s in Eastern Airlines fleet. Officially, these parts were just metal and wires, completely safe. But soon, crews on these other planes began to experience things that were anything but standard, things that defied all logical explanation. It started subtly. A flight attendant would feel a sudden, intense chill in the galley. Another would catch a fleeting glimpse of a face and a polished metal surface where no reflection should be. Then, the sightings became more direct, more undeniable. The apparitions almost always took the same form: two men in Eastern Airlines uniforms, a captain and a flight engineer. They were identified by multiple crew members who had known them in life as the deceased. Captain Bob Loft and flight engineer Don Repo. These were not violent or aggressive hauntings. The spirits appeared calm, almost observant. Pilots would turn around in the cockpit to find Captain Loft standing silently behind them, just watching. On one flight, an engineer was performing a pre-flight check when he came face to face with the apparition of Don Repo. Repo allegedly spoke to him, saying, "You don't need to worry about the pre-flight, I've already done it." Moments later, the spirit vanished. On another flight, the captain and two flight attendants saw the face of Bob Loft staring out at them from a galley oven. They were terrified, but also deeply concerned. They called an engineer to check the oven, but as soon as he arrived, the apparition was gone. The captain, shaken, canceled the flight. Later, it was discovered that the very oven where the face appeared had been salvaged from the wreckage of Flight 401. The stories spread like wildfire through the airline's staff, whispered in crew lounges and on late-night layovers. Flight attendants reported seeing the ghostly figures sitting in passenger seats, only to disappear when approached. A captain on one flight swore he saw Don Repo in the engineer's seat. He said he spoke to him, and Repo seemed concerned, pointing at an instrument panel. A moment later, that very system malfunctioned. It was as if the spectral crew was still on duty, trying to prevent another disaster from happening. One of the most famous encounters involved a flight attendant on a flight to Mexico City. She noticed a pale, quiet man in a captain's uniform sitting in first class. He seemed unresponsive, and she became worried for his health. She tried to speak to him, but he just stared blankly ahead. The flight attendant next to her suddenly gasped, her face turning white. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's Captain Loft." As they both stared, the figure simply faded away, leaving an empty seat. Faced with a growing number of these chilling reports, Eastern Airlines found itself in an impossible position. Publicly, they had to maintain an image of safety and reliability. They couldn't exactly issue a press release saying their planes were haunted. So, they officially denied everything. The stories were dismissed as rumors, the product of overactive imaginations or stress. They pressured employees to stop talking about the sightings, and some witnesses were even ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluations. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. The airline's maintenance logs from that period tell a different story. Reports show systems mysteriously correcting themselves right after a sighting was reported. Electrical faults would vanish, and warning lights would cease flashing without any mechanical intervention. It was as if the ghostly crew of Flight 401 was not just appearing, but actively maintaining the aircraft from beyond the grave. The official denial only fueled the whispers. Crew members began to see the salvaged parts as cursed, contaminated by the tragedy they had witnessed. They would check maintenance records before a flight, trying to see if their plane carried any components from the doomed jetliner. The company, realizing the stories weren't going away and were affecting crew morale, began to quietly and systematically remove all the remaining salvaged parts from its L1011 fleet. There was no announcement, no official recall. The pieces just disappeared. With the removal of the parts, the sightings of Loft and Repo began to dwindle, eventually stopping altogether. The airline never conducted an official investigation into the paranormal claims, or, if they did, the findings were never made public. The witnesses, the pilots, and flight attendants who had seen the impossible were often reassigned or chose to leave aviation entirely, haunted by what they had experienced. The story of Flight 401 became a legend, a ghost story told by pilots to spook new trainees. John G. Fuller even wrote a best-selling book about it called The Ghost of Flight 401, which was later turned into a movie. But even today, the legend endures. It serves as a chilling reminder that some things can't be explained by maintenance logs or engineering reports. It taps into a primal fear that the machines we trust with our lives might carry unseen passengers, echoes of a past tragedy. And that leads to the question that no one in the industry really wants to answer. If a plane can be haunted by the spirits of its former crew, what other memories might be trapped within the metal and wiring of the aircraft we fly in every single day? What happens when a machine bears witness to human tragedy? Does a part of that tragedy stay with it forever? The story of Flight 401 suggests that sometimes, the past doesn't just haunt us, it flies with us. The silence is different. It's heavy. Airports are built on a promise. You arrive, you depart. It's a cycle, a constant flow of people, coming and going. But what happens when that cycle is broken? Not by a delay, not by a cancellation, but by something final. Think about it. We build these massive terminals, these sprawling runways, sometimes on land, with its own history, its own stories. We send billion-dollar machines hurtling through the sky. But for all our modern technology, for all our precision engineering, we're still dealing with something ancient. The simple, profound transition between one place and another, between being here and being somewhere else. Most of the time, it works. Millions of flights, millions of safe arrivals. We celebrate it. We take it for granted. We retire old planes, turning them into scrap metal or trendy restaurants. We shut down old terminals, building bigger, shinier ones in their place. We sanitize, we sterilize, we move on. We believe that's enough. But folklore, the stories whispered between baggage handlers on the late shift, the quiet conversations between pilots in a lonely cockpit, they suggest something different. They suggest that when a journey is violently interrupted, when the promise of arrival is broken, cleaning up the wreckage isn't enough. Something else is required. Something ritualistic. Something that our modern, sterile world has forgotten how to do. It's a global phenomenon. You'll hear stories from the misty fields of England, the dense jungles of South America, the arid deserts of the American Southwest. Different countries, different cultures, different crash sites, but the stories, when you strip them down, are chillingly similar. A feeling of being watched, a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature, the faint, staticky sound of a voice on a dead radio frequency. It seems that some places, once marked by tragedy, never truly become empty. The land remembers. It's not just the land either, it's the metal. Wreckage from fatal crashes is sometimes salvaged. A turbine blade here, a section of fuselage there. These parts, supposedly inert, are sometimes reused in other aircraft. And that's when the stories get really strange. Pilots report inexplicable electrical glitches, instruments that flicker and die over the exact coordinates of the original crash. Flight attendants feel a cold hand on their shoulder in an empty galley. Passengers complain of a persistent, mournful crying sound that no one can trace. It's as if a piece of the tragedy, a fragment of that final, terrifying moment, is now embedded in the very bones of the new machine, flying the skies again and again. A ghost in the machine, quite literally. The official reports will call it equipment malfunction, weather anomalies, crew fatigue, but the people who experience it know better. They know that some things can't be explained away by a maintenance log. They know that when you disturb a place of tragedy, you risk waking something up. And once it's awake, it doesn't always stay where you left it. Investigators who work these crash sites, the ones who walk through the debris fields and piece together the final moments, often report the activity following them home. It starts small, a shadow in the corner of their eye, the feeling of a presence in the room when they're alone. Then it escalates. They start having nightmares, vivid and terrifying, replaying the crash from a passenger's perspective. They feel the jolt, the fall, the impact. They wake up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat. It's not just the investigators. Airport workers, the ones who operate the control towers or patrol the empty runways at 3 in the morning, they have stories too. They hear footsteps echoing down a deserted concourse, long after the last flight has departed. They see figures standing at the end of a jet bridge, figures that vanish when they get closer. And then, it follows them. They get home, exhausted after a long shift, and hear the faint beep of a gate scanner from their empty living room. They hear the quiet, polite cough of someone waiting behind them in their own hallway. Pilots are not immune. Some dream of endless landings, a perpetual loop of approaching a runway they can never quite touch down on. The lights of the tarmac stretch out before them, a beautiful, welcoming sight, but the plane never descends. They are forever suspended between the sky and the ground, trapped in a final approach that never ends. The activity, you see, doesn't stay contained within the airport fences or the crash site perimeter. It latches on. It follows those who were present, those who bore witness to something that was left unfinished. Airports are liminal spaces. They are thresholds. You are neither at your origin nor at your destination. You are in between. It's a place of pure potential, a place of transition. You arrive with the excitement of a new beginning. You depart with the bittersweet feeling of an ending. That is the natural order of things. But when death interrupts that process, violently and without warning, something gets stuck. That energy, that potential, doesn't just dissipate. It remains suspended in that in-between state. Think of it like a recording stuck on a loop, a departure that never completed, an arrival that was never met. The souls, or the echoes, or whatever you want to call them, are not alive, but they are not entirely gone either. They are simply waiting for a flight that will never be called, waiting for loved ones who will never greet them. They wander the terminals, sit in the departure lounges, and stand by the gates, forever caught in the moment their journey was supposed to continue. So a final warning. If you work near an old, abandoned runway, one that's been reclaimed by weeds and cracked by time, and you see the ghostly shimmer of landing lights in the fog where no lights should be, turn away. If you're in a control tower late at night, and your radar screen shows a blip, a phantom aircraft moving silently across the airspace, an aircraft with no transponder, no call sign, something that technically shouldn't exist, do not try to contact it. And if you're walking through an empty terminal, and you hear your own name whispered over the public address system, a faint, distorted voice calling out from the silence, do not answer. Do not acknowledge it. Just keep walking. Because some things are looking for a connection. They are looking for a way to finish their journey, and you do not want to be their destination. Some planes never landed. Some airports were never truly emptied. And for some passengers, the gate is still open, and they are still waiting to leave. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a new nightmare.